Hey there, Suzi here. Before we get into today's episode, I want to share this special message with you. Now, my co-host Michelle and I love masterminds. Not only do we belong to masterminds, but we also host a mastermind. We started it almost 8 years ago, and it is the premier mastermind for women business owners who want to grow their business with a specific focus on marketing. Now, this group is usually completely booked out, and very occasionally we open the doors and invite a handful of women in. So if you're growing your business, but you're struggling with feeling overwhelmed, or like you constantly have a split focus when it comes to your marketing, this could be exactly what you're looking for. We have an amazing time together, and the women in the group are extraordinary. They're great cheerleaders, supporters, advisors, and colleagues for you. And they're also seeing extraordinary results. We see people cracking the $1 million, $2 million, $3 million mark, launching new e-commerce sites that go from $0 to $10,000 a month in sales. They're doubling their conversion rates, they're growing memberships, they're selling courses, they're growing their personal brands, and they're getting all kinds of media exposure and speaking opportunities and so much more. You can learn more about the mastermind and join the wait list over at herbusinessmastermind.com. We're going to open the doors soon, so you definitely want to be on the list to get an invitation. So head on over to herbusinessmastermind.com. Hey, it's Suzi here. We have a fantastic episode of the Content Sells podcast for you today. But before we dive in, I want to invite you to join me on Monday, the 14th of March, for a new workshop. It's called The Road to a 6- and 7-Figure Business, and I'm walking you through my step-by-step roadmap for finally having breakthrough growth in your business, reaching your financial targets, and building a sustainable business without burnout or stress. You'll leave knowing exactly what direction to take, even if right now you're overwhelmed and unsure what to do next. Get all the details at roadtobiggerbusiness.com. That's roadtobiggerbusiness.com. Now, let's go to today's episode. Create content that attracts, converts, and keeps your ideal clients. This is Content Sells. Hi, you're listening to the Content Sells podcast, the show all about how to create content to attract, convert, and keep your ideal clients. Welcome to episode 180. I'm Suzi Dafnis, and here with me is my co-host, Michelle Falzon. Hey, Michelle, how are you?
Hey, Suzi, I'm great, thanks, and very much looking forward to chatting with our guest today.
Yeah, it's always great when we get a guest on the show. And today we're going to be looking at something I know a lot of our listeners want to know more about, and that is how to write great copy. And in particular, we're going to be talking about how to use that copy to attract and build relationships with key strategic partners or other influencers in your business.
This is absolutely a hot topic because you can make a lot of headway much faster in your business, whether you're just getting started and you don't have much of a list or an audience or a budget, or whether you've got a very established business and you can get a much faster runway, much more momentum when you can find great strategic partners who share the same audience as you and can act as referrers or joint marketing partners or be strategic channels for you to reach your ideal customers, and so much more. We're huge fans of this strategy.
And to help us navigate how you can do that, plus to give us all some amazing copy tips, we are thrilled to be speaking with Bernadette Schwerdt from the Australian School of Copywriting.
We sure are. And Bernadette is an award-winning Australian entrepreneur, author. She's a TEDx speaker, and she's an advertising copywriter. So she's got a lot of experience. She was actually former senior account director and copywriter for global advertising agency Young and Rubicam Advertising. And when I used to work in advertising, they were a really big deal. And she worked on campaigns for clients like Apple and Amex and Optus and Colgate. So she's really done that at the big end of town as well. And then in 2001, she founded the Australian School of Copywriting. And since then, she's trained over 9,000 people to become freelance copywriters. She's been the producer and host of the Age newspaper's online video series, Secrets of Online Entrepreneurs, which subsequently, speaking about really interesting content strategies, that subsequently became a best-selling book of the same name, which Bernadette also wrote. She's got a Bachelor of Business in Marketing. She's an accredited MBTI and NLP practitioner. She's lectured in marketing, consumer psychology, digital marketing at Melbourne University, RMIT, Swinburne, Victoria University. She's in demand. And in her spare time, which I find so interesting, Suzi, She teaches meditation, and she was the in-house mindfulness coach for the Carlton Football Club, although she's careful to point out that she takes no responsibility, however, for their recent on-field performance, which I don't know anything about because I'm sorry to confess I don't watch the football. But she's got a top-rating podcast on Triple M's podcast platform Listener, and she's also the host of the popular podcast, which we'll give you a link to, So You Want to Be a Copywriter. And she was recently named in the top 50 small business leaders in Australia.
That is Bernadette, and let's now go to our interview with Bernadette.
Bernadette, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It's great to have you here.
My absolute pleasure.
Hey, that is quite an impressive bio that you have, a lot of experience. And I want to pick up on the point. It's quite amazing. You've helped over 9,000 people at the Australian School of Copywriting. And I know we're going to dig into speaking specifically about using copy to attract and engage strategic partners. But I was really curious to know right out of the gate, given you've seen so many people make that leap to becoming awesome copywriters, what are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen time and time again that we all need to get over to write better, more effective copy?
Okay, great question. I think firstly, believing that copy is valuable. I think people sometimes put it to the side as I'll get around to it kind of thing, whereas it should be a core pillar of your marketing strategy because it sells you. You know, it gives you the SEO that you need to get on page one, and it sells you 24/7 so that when you're not actually on, it's working for you. So I think it's really just genuinely committing to it and believing that it has value. I think the second thing is to know that it's a bit like getting, doing your own haircut or your own tax. It's not a good idea, right? You can do it, but the result may not be what you're looking for, and you may not, be proud of it. And copy is a bit like that. And the reality is, if you're an accountant or you're a yoga teacher, you've been spending your life learning that trade, not copywriting. And copywriting is a skill. And so just to acknowledge that it is an art, it is a science, and you shouldn't be expected to know it. And therefore, when you do struggle with it, accept that, and either go and get training or go and get someone to help you. And I personally think, now I would say this, obviously, I run a copywriting school, but I think if somebody just has a little bit of an understanding of copywriting and they know the formulas, they know the structures, they know the briefing documents, then when they do hire a copywriter, they can talk to them at a level that makes sense to that copywriter, and also they can assess the copy they get back much more effectively. They know the work that goes into it, so they know whatever they're paying, they know whether they're getting value for money. So I think it's a little bit of knowledge goes a long way too.
Yes, I agree. I would recommend that, you invest in copywriting, even if you're not planning on writing all your copy, for those reasons that you said there. And I just want to, right out of the gate as well, we're just for our listeners, we're talking about copy. And obviously you're on a show called Content Sells, and there's this idea of there's content and then there's copy. Could you just speak a little bit to the difference between those two things?
Sure. Well, in the old days, when I started, copywriting was true selling. It was salesmanship or salespersonship in print, and it was designed to do what the salesperson couldn't do. And now it's kind of morphed a lot. So, for example, in the old days, it was things like writing TV commercials, radio ads, websites, email content, fax. Remember fax marketing in the old days? So I'm really it's a very old skill. It's back Mad Men. Think about the Mad Men days, that copywriting was key then. And now we've morphed into more of the content space, where I call it just a sort of a soft sell. And so content could be a podcast, it could be a slide deck, it's a YouTube video, it's a white paper. So it's basically using words to communicate your value and to communicate your thought leadership, with the view that eventually somebody will purchase you or change their opinion or come on board, whatever, that copy is designed to do. So I think the short answer, copy is more about the hard sell. You actually want people to do something now, and content is more about education, entertainment, just getting engagement.
I love that distinction, and I think it really is an important one. And I know for me, Bernadette, and I think this is true for many of our listeners, that just the idea of writing copy can feel like like it's a chore, especially if it's not our core strength and we are a bookkeeper or we do massage or we do facials or whatever. And say we have chosen to do it ourselves, having this not be our core strength can lead to things like procrastination or just keep putting that thing off. Do you have any advice for those who are getting started on a project and how to get over any procrastination or writer's block or just that resistance that I know I've often felt to just getting started with writing copy?
It's a big deal, yeah, because it does take a lot of energy. And if you don't have a skill set and a structure and a process, it feels like you're flailing and you've got this blank screen and you really don't know where to begin. So it's no wonder people don't go forward with it. So a couple of tips would be, treat yourself like a mini advertising agency. So on one hand, you've got your account service person, and that person takes the brief. And all they're really interested in are the facts. You know, who's the target audience? What is this piece meant to do? What are the features and benefits? What is the tone? So it's true just investigation. And then the other side of the coin is more the creative side, which is the copywriter's role. And they take that brief, a written brief, and then they make it come alive. And they're two separate skill sets. And what happens for a lot of business owners is they combine the two and they conflate it, and it becomes quite muddied. And so therefore they start writing and then they realize, oh, I don't know what I'm writing about. I don't know what I'm trying to achieve. Who am I writing for? So if you just at the get-go separate the jobs into that, you know, one or the other, then you're going to get a better result. Secondly, would be to get really clear about your word count. So I know that sounds really simple, but if you don't know that you're writing 1,000-word or a 3,000-word blog or a 300-word blog, you're going to come into strife because you write according to the space you have. So if you just give yourself that discipline at the beginning to say this is a 500-word blog, and therefore you know how much you've got to play with. I think the other thing to consider is, what is the objective of the piece? Like, have a very specific call to action. Is it that you'd like people to download a checklist? Is it you'd like them to enroll in a webinar? Would you like them to, watch the video? So whatever that one thing is, and it should ideally be one thing, then I think that all the copy that you're writing needs to point towards that and give them good reasons as to why they should do that. I think just the last thing would be, sometimes the target market's too broad that they're writing for. They think it's for everybody. Mm-hmm. Whereas, and I use the analogy, it's a weird one, but it's a bit like you got a glass of red wine, right? And you spill it on a napkin. And in the center of the napkin, it's deep red, right? That's your core target audience, maybe your customer persona. But then the red wine kind of spans out and it goes a bit pink. Well, that pink, you do reach those people through that piece of content, but you're doing it specifically for the people in the middle, the red wine, right? So I know it's kind of a weird analogy, but I like it because people say, but I'll lose all the other people that I want to connect with. No, you won't. If you write for that one specific person, you're almost writing for them across the desk. You can see them, you're looking them in the eye, you're having a conversation. By definition, other people will resonate with it. But if you try and write for everybody, it becomes very muddied and it just doesn't engage.
I do like that analogy, and I do like red wine, I'm just saying.
Well, I did think about it one night when I was drinking red wine and I spilled it, and I thought, I'm very creative right now. Yeah.
An analogy I often use, which is similar, is if you think of a dartboard and you score a point if the dart ends up anywhere on the board, but it's that bullseye, like who is in that bullseye and hitting that bullseye. I don't know what that says about me.
Well, it's much more professional than a red wine stain.
I do like yours. Either works.
Maybe you just like drinking your red wine at the pub while
playing darts. That could be dangerous.
I'm having this whole persona come through to me now. It's very, very broken.
So assuming we decide, okay, I need a copywriter, is there a particular type of project that would be a trigger, a good time to bring on a copywriter, or is it a particular stage in our business? How would you approach it if we were a first-time copywriter hire?
I do. I think there's a couple of answers. One is just try it yourself, right? Just give it a go. And you can actually see the stumbling blocks, the barriers, the hindrances, right? Just to fully understand. And maybe you don't get a result. So you've at least tried, right? You've had a shot. The next stage to think about is, maybe you want to get copy done and you're doing a little bit and you're okay at it, but you don't have the consistency. And I think that's where a lot of business owners fall down, because they genuinely start out really excited and motivated. They've got a content calendar. They're going to send out 2 emails every month and 3 blogs, etc., and 50 social media posts. And by month 3, they're done. They're gone. So it becomes this all or nothing. So I think if you're struggling to find the momentum and you can't consistently keep up, that's a really good moment to engage a copywriter. And also, if you're not getting results, if you find that you search for yourself, and that, by the way, is a very confronting thing to do, but go to Google and search your first, your full name and also your business name, see where you land. That is a moment of recognition, of reckoning, and you go, wow, I didn't realize. So I think getting honest about where you stand in the market, because what we think is one thing, but it's what Google thinks of us is another. And until we truly understand how we're being represented, I think it's very difficult to even recognize that we need copy.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Googling yourself. I know not many of us want to do it, but I think it is a necessary thing to do every now and then. And I agree, copywriting can be one of the biggest pain points for business owners. We hear that a lot. Either writing it themselves, like we've been talking about, and not loving it or not being great at it, or not loving what happens when they search for themselves on Google, but also paying for copy that falls short or doesn't match their voice or achieve their goals. And you've got a lot of experience in this space. So what advice do you have for finding the right copywriter when that moment does come, and then making sure that our listeners, the content sales listeners, are able to give that copywriter the right brief so they can then achieve the desired outcome?
It is. It's a bit like finding a good accountant, a good financial planner, a good architect, really difficult. And just a Google search is not always guaranteed to deliver that best person for you, because, there's lots of factors as to why you resonate with somebody. So I do think a recommendation obviously is always a good place to start. I'm really happy for anyone to contact me if they would like a recommendation to a copywriter, because I've got my finger on the pulse of lots and lots of copywriters, both new and experienced and middleweight as well. I think also it's about the briefing. And I know no one likes to hear that because it sort of signifies work, but it's a bit like the architect I just mentioned. If you have an architect and you're having a briefing and they just go off and say, I know exactly what you want, I haven't talked to you, but I know exactly what you want, I'm going to build you a dream home, be worried, right? You want the architect who sits down with you and says, okay, tell me what you want. Why do you want that? And then they keep asking, but why? It's the copywriter who can challenge you a little bit, I think, is someone to be valued. And some business owners may not like that. They say, well, why are you challenging me? I know what I want. But it's through the challenging I'll give you an example. Some people say, oh, I need a blog. It's like, why? Well, I need a blog, but why? And if you ask the right questions, they discover, well, maybe they need another kind of content, but not the blog. They still need content, but not the blog. So people get hung up on the medium and they think, I need to be on social media, I need LinkedIn or whatever. And they might, but a good copywriter can actually take a step back, look at the business objectives and say, okay, based on what you've told me, what your needs are, what your budget is, why you're advertising, who you're trying to get to, this is my recommendation. So I think a copywriter who has a truly consultative approach and is honest and challenges and pushes back a little bit is gold. Because that's what you're paying for, isn't it? You don't want an accountant who just does what you say, or an accountant, or an architect who just does what you say. You want someone to just challenge you a little bit. So I think that would be the hallmarks or the traits of a copywriter that I would value.
I really love that point. The 2 parts of it, both the consultative approach, but also that people get hung up on the medium. And just this morning in one of our groups, I was answering a question about someone who's like, well, how do I get more people to read my blog? And when I look at her business, I'm not even sure that the blog is what she should be focusing her copy on. And but sometimes, we decide on something and then we get stuck on it because we haven't sat back and thought, okay, where do I really need to be writing copy? Where is my ideal client? And if they're not coming to her blog, maybe it's better spent somewhere else. Anyway, I could go on a little tangent there.
I enjoyed that.
One of the strategies that we're offering, encouraging our masterminders, so Michelle and I have a year-long mastermind program, and that we're also encouraging our wider Her Business network to do, is to implement a strategic alliance strategy where they can find people who have a similar audience to them and to go about trying to find a way to create scenarios where both people benefit from the relationship. And that could be an email email swap or delivering a webinar to each other's audiences or doing Facebook Lives together, speaking on each other's stages, that sort of thing. One of the tougher parts of that process is that when you've identified someone who would be a perfect strategic partner, but you don't know them, how do you approach them? Like, what could you say? And so I want to ask you, and this is a kind of sideways sort of question, what kind of copy strategies or approach might you recommend we use to reach out to that person to start off the relationship, to break the ice?
I think the first thing I would say is personalize it. I think we've all received LinkedIn messages where it's completely automated and it's completely unpersonalized and you just ignore it. So I think firstly, acknowledging it might take a little bit of time just to craft their own personal message, but it's worth doing. I think the other thing to think about is you don't need tons of partnerships, right? So invest a little bit in each of those personalized messages so that you do get what you want. Thirdly, treat it like a piece of copy. So, you want your outcome, you know what it is, you know what's in it for them. You know what the features and benefits are of them coming along. The ask is very clear. So I think treat it truly like a piece of copy and be very mindful of what's in it for them. So in terms of LinkedIn, I find, is a wonderful way to exchange those requests. And one of the things is to start the conversation and not go too heavy into the ask too early. So it's a bit like, you meet someone and you ask them to marry them, right? I haven't had coffee yet, or I haven't even had dinner, right? So why are you coming on so strong? So I think you have to build that relationship a little bit. And this is where LinkedIn is lovely. I'll give an example. I've had people who say to me on LinkedIn, I really enjoyed your book, or I listened to your podcast, I loved it. And then even in the next message, I'm so much more predisposed to listening to that message, whatever that request or ask might be, because they've taken the time to actually know my content, engage with it. And that's complimentary to me. And I think we're all susceptible to flattery. And we can't assume that even people who are extremely busy and extremely high profile aren't. So I think I'll give an example. I was reading an article of a journalist, she's a columnist with The Age and Sydney Morning Herald. I don't know her, but I loved her article. And I just found her on LinkedIn and I sent her a genuine message saying, I loved your article so much, I just had to reach out. I just love the frank, fearless nature of how you write. She got back to me really quickly and said, you have made my day. I've had a really bad week and just hearing that has really given me a lift. And then we had this lovely conversation and then I invited her onto my podcast, which by the way is another strategy, is to actually invite people onto your podcast if you have one, because it's a lovely soft way to get to know someone. And we connected so brilliantly. I literally had dinner at her house in Ocean Grove on the weekend with her husband and I.
Great.
It's like we've built this friendship and it's only 3 months ago that we met. So it's kind of a segue, but I think you've just got to be very personal and be very clear what's in it for them. And a podcast is a fantastic way to invite people in and give them something back and promote them and sort of build your database as well.
Thank you.
I love that. And, you were giving there an example about a friendship, but, all strategic partnerships, all strategic alliances are relationships of one form or another. And I think so often people feel like they've got to have some sort of personality transplant to reach out to business colleagues or to reach out to strategic partners. So I really think what you're saying there about the sincere outreach, the genuine kind of interest, all of those things, it's really about being a good human and finding ways to communicate to people in a really clear way.
Yeah, and also just even promote their content. If you feel really nervous about doing something, just find an article that they've written or a video that they've created and just promote it. And just, my belief is give, right? Just share and help others get what they want. And hopefully the circle, comes around and comes back to you at some point. It may not be from that one person, but that's the karmic view, isn't it, of business? And I think just have a genuine desire to reward others and promote them and praise as much as you can.
Yes, I'm reminded of that fabulous Zig Ziglar quote, you can get everything in life you want if you'll just help enough other people get what they want. And I think that's very true when it comes to strategic partnerships. And so once we've done that, once we've broken the ice, what are your thoughts, especially in terms of from a copy perspective, from what we write and say to people? What are your thoughts about how we stay in touch? Either when we do have something we want to talk to them about specifically, you kind of mentioned the ask, or even when we don't have something specific, but we want to keep that connection strong and alive and build that relationship over time. What are some of your tips?
Well, firstly, if it's possible to, contact them on a fairly frequent basis to demonstrate your value. So if they're on your database, again, that's not that personal necessarily, but just making sure that you're visible and that you have what you give out is good content. I think, as I said, starting small, I think any kind of partnership, you don't want to commit to something too large too quickly. So it could be just sharing, as I said, sharing each other's content, or it could be getting each other on the podcast, or it could be, putting a quote out that they made or something like that. So I think it's just about gently, just, bit by bit, building that relationship. And I think you've just got to understand what is it you both want. And personally, I think like affiliates and commissions are all okay. But when people start off too early with that sort of affiliate mentality, it's a bit like, well, I'll only give you something if you've got a database of 50,000. It's like, well, my database is 2,000, right? So therefore I'm not valuable to you. So I think don't count the numbers early on. I think just genuinely share each other's content and help each other get what they want.
As a business owner, speaking to a vast community of other women business owners, what else would you like to share about this topic with our listeners?
I think what is good about a partnership, a strategic partnership, is it reduces your marketing costs. And I'll give you some examples. I am a mentor for a range of different organisations, and so they bring me in and I train their clients. And through that training, I'm building my brand, I'm building my business. And so even though, for example, most of them are paid, but some of them aren't. And over my career, I've often worked for nothing if I felt that the community that I was talking to was, part of the network that I wanted to be in front of. So I think if you do your partnerships correctly and you are mindful that you do want partnerships, it can take care of a lot of the costs that you don't want to incur and a lot of the work that you don't want to do. So, for example, I have a podcast with the Australian Writers' Centre. It's called So You Want to Be a Copywriter. And I do what I love, which is I love interviewing people. I love getting really interesting people on and picking their brains about copywriting. And what the Australian Writers' Centre do for me is they produce it, and they distribute it and they, do all the technical side. And it's that wonderful partnership that enables me to do what I love, and then they do what they're really good at, and we both benefit. And if you think about the good partnerships, it's all about you do what you're really good at, and you let the other people be good at what they do, and together you are more than the sum of the parts. So I think it's getting clear about what you're good at, what your superpower is, we call it these days, and trying to find others who don't do that but want to do something else that you're not good at. And therefore you can reduce your marketing costs. Because if I just make, a podcast a fortnight, that's joy for me. It's not hard. But the production and the technical and the uploading to Spotify is not my strength,
Right.
So if you find, and even like, say, web developers, a lot of my students, I say to them, your strategic partnership should be with web developers, because when they have a client who hasn't got good copy, that makes their life difficult. The web developer looks bad because the website looks bad because the copy's not good. So, I say, rather than just go and get your own clients one-to-one, connect with a web developer and provide a service to them. Same with graphic designers, photographers, business coaches, marketing coaches. Copywriters can be very valuable assets to those organizations because they do, and they make that other person look good.
Thank you.
Yeah, so much in what you just said, especially that strategic partnerships and alliances don't just have to look like I'll send an email to your list and you'll send an email to, you'll send an email to your list and I'll send an email to my list. It really can be so creative. And I think you're sharing some examples there of that creativity. We often call that peaches and cream. They just go so nicely
that's
together.
Nice. I'll give you an example. I just had a webinar just now, and it was with an SEO agency. And one of my students who now works there, who's done really well, he and I and my copy school have collaborated to create an internship for students of my course, so that when they graduate from my course, they get an internship in a paid sense to write copy for this SEO agency. And this is what world's best SEO agency. They just won world's best agency. And so that to me is a great strategic alliance. Now, I don't instantly get something from that, but that's good. My students get an opportunity. And if I can help them succeed, I've won. And he gets trained students who are now above the average. So everyone wins. So the partnerships can be as creative as you want them to be. Just work out, what do you need? How can you serve your community? How can you help them win? And then you find someone who can help those same people win from their perspective as well.
Yes, when we can help our customers win, we ultimately win as well. I love what you're saying there. Bernadette, thank you so much for sharing your brilliance with us today on the show. I've loved picking up so many tips from you.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love that. It was just very clear, concise, great strategies that I think anybody listening will be able to implement, especially in regards to, one, getting started with copywriting, but two, using approaches to strategic alliances, thinking about it as copy. That was a great distinction.
Yeah. And, it really is. It's you want to be as thoughtful about your outreach to your strategic partners right from the icebreaker, and then how you maintain that relationship, as you are about how you craft a funnel or a marketing campaign, because it really is another form of a marketing campaign.
Well, there was a few things that I definitely jotted down that I would love to take a moment to recap. And one of those was about getting hung up on the medium. And I think the exact words that Bernadette used is that when we're thinking about copy, just to be really thoughtful, using a word Michelle just used, about where are we creating content and copy for? And because we don't need to be in all the places and we don't need to be saying all the things everywhere. And so is a blog the best place for you to put your copywriting resources towards, or is it your social media posts if you have a bigger following, or that's where the best place is? Or is the copywriting best for the sales pages that you're going to be using for your upcoming launch of your course or your challenge or the next webinar you're doing? And just being really committed to putting the right copy right where your ideal client is going to be making themselves available to read it.
Such a good point. And sometimes that means, stopping things that you've been doing, because, just because you've always had a blog doesn't mean you need to keep having a blog.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
One of the other things I thought that was great, because, Bernadette's obviously got that history in advertising, was some advice for us if we're doing our own copywriting, was to think about separating out the jobs. So, if you've got an email campaign to write, and I see this, and I'm sure you see it too, Suzi, when we're reviewing people's email campaigns, they kind of just jump in and start writing. And she talked about really treating it like having an agency where you have the account person take the brief and really think about, well, what are the objectives for this campaign and who is this for and all of those things. And then they bring it back and give it to the copywriter. Now, you may be both of those people in your organization, but realizing which of those two hats you're wearing saves you kind of getting halfway through a campaign and going, you know what, I'm not really sure this is hitting the mark, or I've just realized I'm including, parents when this isn't going to be relevant to parents, or whatever the situation might be. So I thought that was a great distinction. Just changing your hats from the brief taker to the copywriter can save you a lot of heartache, and make sure you start with all the right info. And, that means interviewing yourself, and you might feel crazy, but I've done that many times. And the other thing that just sort of follows on from that is that I really loved, and this has been my personal experience having hired lots of copywriters over the years, appreciating a copywriter who challenges you. She said, I'd be worried if they weren't challenging you. And it's kind of like oftentimes a less, shall we say, skilled or experienced or perhaps less confident copywriter is just going to kind of come into your world and be like an order taker. I want to write a blog and I want to do this and I want to do that. And they just sort of fulfill your request. But when you've got a copywriter who will come in and say, well, hang on, where is your customer survey data? How do I speak the language of your customers? Why are you doing this way? What is the ultimate goal of this campaign? that is going to be more difficult. They're going to be a more difficult person to work with in some ways, but ultimately they're going to be able to write you typically more strategic, more successful copy. And I think about the copywriters in my life that I've hired, and there is really kind of a clear line between the order takers and then those people who actually want to achieve the objective, and they want to be really clear about what that objective is and to use their own talents and what they know works to get there. And that will often expand your own awareness about what works. You know, they're not just doing what you say, they're bringing their own brilliance to the table.
I love that. And I have worked with both of those types, as you said. And it's all well and good to have someone who's just the hands, you know, they're just saying, this is what I want, and they go do it. But it's someone else who thinks holistically, who, and we don't mean challenge you in a bad way, but just in a way that you can tell they're thinking about their job. They're not just doing the task. There was something that Bernadette said that I thought was really good for those of us who do want to take on copywriting for ourselves, but just to have some structure around it. Like, who is the who? Like, who is that red wine right in the middle, that's staying, versus, you know, who might be a little further away. And really knowing our who is something we talk about all the time here on the podcast. And one of our most listened to episodes was the episode about Ideal Client, and that's an episode we keep referring you back to. But really knowing, who is this for? What is this piece of content or copy designed to do? What am I asking people to do? Do I have a very clear singular focus for the content, and do I have a very clear singular next step? And even things like knowing the word count, because, you know, when I sit down and try and write copy, it helps to know, okay, this only needs to be, you know, this number of characters because it's for social media versus this big because it's a blog post, or this long because it's an email sequence. And just simple though it might sound, it really puts the parameters around the work you're doing, and I think it allows you to be more successful in that time where you are doing your copywriting.
I completely agree with that. We talked a bit about copy in general because I just wanted to tap into her brilliance and experience in that space. And then it was so interesting to then dig into thinking about specific questions around copy for strategic alliances. And I was kind of jumping up and down in agreement when she talked about this idea of starting small. And, you know, that's both in terms of the way you make your first outreach. You know, she just wrote to someone and said, I really loved that article, or you could write to someone and say how much you appreciated their podcast, or whatever it might be. But also, even once you have the relationship up and running, starting small with that first thing you might do together. And that's something that I very much agree with, because it's easy to do something small and realize, hey, we're not a match, and part ways for whatever reason, audience or philosophy or whatever it might be. And it's also a great way to test the water when something is going to be a very fruitful relationship, just to make sure that when you do go out in a big way, that you've kind of got your ducks in a row and you've sort of done a few tests and you know how things work. So I loved that. And part of that was this idea of a lot of people start off right away with that affiliate mentality, as she referred to it. And that can cost you, especially at the start of a relationship. You know, it's like immediately beginning at this very, and Suzi, this is a phrase you use with your framework that you have kind of underpinning Her Business Network. But when you start off very transactional, hey, I've got this list, and will you email to your list and I'll email to my list, or I've got this thing I want to sell and I'll give you 20%. Or when you start off like that, it can really cost you those relationships in the longer term.
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoyed that too, because that it can be normal. You're like, you are approaching the relationship because you want something, but it's like the best way to blow the person away is to ask too soon, you know, which is what she was talking about. The other thing that I really enjoyed about the strategic alliances conversation that we were having with Bernadette is this idea of getting really clear about what you're good at. And she gave the example of her podcast and how she brings to the podcast her expertise, but it's the team at the Australian Writers Centre who publish it and edit it and get it out there in the world. And we were having a similar conversation, Michelle, with one of our masterminders, well, a number of them really, about this. Get clear about what you're good at. So maybe you do have a list that's an email list that's, 1,000 people or 2,000 people, that doesn't mean that you can't be doing strategic alliances with people with much bigger email lists if you have something else of value. And inside of the mastermind, we were talking about one of our incredible members who we have mentioned here on the show before, Amanda Farmer, who is an expert in how to demystify the legalities of apartment living. And so she is a whiz at running webinars and doing online presentations. And so she's got these strategic alliances with councils who have squazillion people on their database, but their expertise is not at producing online events. And so she produces and presents events on their behalf in this area of demystifying the complexities of apartment living. Now, she has a membership that she's growing, and that is a really great partnership for her. Like, she couldn't go to that council and say, hey, would you promote my webinar and I'll promote something the council's doing. That would just never have worked. But what she knew she was really good at is that she had this core piece of content that was going to be really valuable to meet the council's objectives. And so when Bernadette said, really be clear on what's in it for them. And so get clear on what's in it for them and getting clear on what you are bringing to the party that is of value to them, right, is such an important part of creating those strategic alliances.
Absolutely. What is in it for them?
So thank you once again to Bernadette for being our guest on this episode of the Content Source podcast. You can reach Bernadette at a couple of places. One is www.copyschool.com, which is her website, and you can learn about the different programs she has. And also the podcast that we've mentioned a couple of times is So You Want to Be a Copywriter. So if you just look for that anywhere you listen to podcasts, you will be able to find that. And as I said, over on her site, you'll find details about some of her courses, including her SEO copywriting course. We're going to put all of that information as well as Bernadette's contact info over on our website. So you can find that over at herbusiness.com/copy school. That's herbusiness.com/copy school. We'll also add there any mentions of other episodes or resources that we've mentioned here on the show today. So we love to bring wonderful experts like Bernadette to the show, and we want to help. Our goal with this show is to help as many business owners as possible create content that attracts and converts and keeps their ideal clients. So if you would like to help in that mission that we have, all you need to do is leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. So if you enjoyed today's episode, we would love it if you would leave us a review. And so just head on over to Apple Podcasts to do that. One of our listeners is the wonderful Kat Matson, who is also a member of the Her Business Network. And at the end of the year, one of the things that Spotify does is it shows you your top things you've listened to that year. And they send you a little collection of, hey, here are the top songs. Kat's top listened to was actually the Content Source podcast. And she apparently listened to, I can't remember how many minutes it was, but it was 658. That's what it was. 658 minutes of listening to me and Michelle. You are my hero, Kat Matson. And Kat has a business called Impactful Presenters. So she teaches people how to be able to present with power and confidence and never be lost for words. So thank you for listening, and well spent 658 minutes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kat.
I think she's done that driving places. She said she does a lot of driving, and that I'm sure there's a lot of people who are listening to us while they're driving.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to know where you listen to us, actually. If you want to be in touch with me, Michelle, the best place is to head on over to our Content Sales Podcast Facebook page. So if you just look up Content Sales, you'll see our smiling faces. And that's a great place to say hi, to ask questions, and get quick responses from me and Michelle. Now, we produce this episode every 2 weeks. And Michelle, what's coming up in the next episode?
We have got an episode that we think you're going to love. We're going to share some marketing tools that we love. And, you know, there's in any marketing funnel or in any content strategy, there are these cracks and crevices that require little tools to join things together or that make life a little easier. And we are going to share some of our most loved marketing apps, tools, software, things that we recommend, things that we use, and why we think they might be useful for you. You never know. You might just pick up one or two things that make life a little easier.
Absolutely. That is out 2 weeks from the release of this particular episode. So if you're not already a subscriber to the show, hit that subscribe button and we will see you then. Thank you so much for listening. Michelle, anything you want to say before we go?
Thank you again to Bernadette. It was just a pleasure to get your tips and your insight today. And I do encourage all our listeners to go and check out all the great things that Bernadette's putting out into the world.
Thanks, Michelle. We'll see you next time right here on the Content Sales Podcast. Bye for now.